Good afternoon, students. Welcome to this class of communication research, COM 3706. As I said last week, today I'll be discussing the research methodology framework, which is 1.6 in your mark scheme. So I'll just be taking you through what is expected of you or what you should do in this section of the assignment. By now, I believe you've already progressed. I believe you are far or even done. So you can just use this to edit your assignment and to see that you've addressed everything that is expected of you in the research method section of your assignment 1. And again, I would like to remind you that the deadline is the 22nd of March. The deadline is the 22nd of March. And please note that there will be no extension, as we said earlier. Please make sure that you work on your assignment and always start your assignments on time, especially at third level, because there's a lot of work. There's a lot of work that you have to do for each assignment. So if you have not started your assignment, really, that is really bad, because you've got articles to read and your prescribed book to read as well. And for this section, for the methodology section, all the information you need actually is in your prescribed book. I will mention some of the chapters, but you just have to go through your prescribed book to get the concepts and that you have to address in this in the research method section. So please refer to your prescribed book, check the table of contents. You will definitely find, all these concepts are there. Again, just to remind you, you don't have to attach the questionnaire or even design the questionnaire with this assignment. So at this moment, it's still a proposal. You'd only attach your questionnaire when you submit your exam portfolio. So for now, all you have to do is to tell us how you will collect data. So you don't have to design the questionnaire at this stage. So please just take note of that, because I've received a few questions about the questionnaire. At this stage, you're only discussing your research design and the data collection method or instruments that you will be using. Again, just to take you through what is expected in this section, it's there in your tutorial letter or the assignment document under assessment 1. This question is out of 10 marks, so you should write at least 1 page. So your discussion or your description of these concepts should be a bit brief. Some of them are just one-liners. For instance, what is your unit of analysis? That is just 1 sentence. But you have to describe all these, these concepts and demonstrate that you understand. And here you have to apply and not just describe concepts from the prescribed book. For instance, if you say the goal of your study is basic or applied research, you need to know what is basic research before you can say that your study falls under basic research. So please make sure that you study these concepts first before you describe your research methodology or your research method framework. So I'll just be taking you through some of these key questions here on what is expected of you and briefly what they are. Again, please refer to your prescribed book. I will not be, defining or describing these in detail. You have to read them and understand. But I'll just give a brief overview. So for your first question, for instance, you have to describe the different characteristics between qualitative and quantitative research designs. Please refer to chapter 2 of your prescribed book for the description of these of the characteristics of quantitative and qualitative research designs. Your answer here should be brief, at least a paragraph, again, because the overall section is out of 10 marks, meaning all these concepts. Okay, and then after describing, they need to explain why your research design is both qualitative and quantitative. Okay, basically, qualitative research is mainly used when the aim of the research is to explore or describe areas where there is limited or no prior information. The samples of qualitative research are usually small compared to quantitative research. Here, the aim is to explore a phenomenon, an area, or even a topic where little is known. For instance, if you were to explore whether people in rural areas use social media networks and which social media networks do they use and why, that there's little that is known about, how people in various areas, for instance, rural versus urban, literate versus those who cannot read or write in English, especially in South Africa, as a multilingual society, So people can even explore such questions. They have been explored, of course, I'm sure, but very few studies have addressed such, especially when looking at a global scale, because most of these studies are usually conducted in the West, in European, American, and basically all in Western countries, or even China, the East Asian, more developed countries. So qualitative research is usually to explore a phenomenon where there's little that is known, using much smaller samples, and usually they describe, you collect non-numeric data where you would describe and write down, for instance, in themes, or organize your data thematically, and usually providing a much more detailed description of a phenomenon. For instance, if you're investigating why people are using certain social media or are not using social media at all, you need to describe how old are these people, what is the environment they live in, how much is data in that environment, is it accessible to everybody, or maybe it's not, it's expensive for some. So you have to really provide a rich description of what you are investigating. Quantitative research, on the other hand, is mainly used to provide a numerical description of a phenomenon. So here they use mainly statistics, graphs, tables, and usually the samples are large, they could, investigating the social media networks used by South Africans, and questionnaires could be distributed. You could even hire research assistants who would distribute questionnaires across the country in urban and rural areas. So quantitative research usually would tell you what is happening. For instance, which social media is mostly used by South Africans, but it wouldn't really explain why are people mostly, for instance, if they find out that the majority of people are using Facebook instead of Twitter, it would tell us that the majority, 80% of South Africans use Twitter, but we wouldn't know why they're using Twitter. Is it easy to use compared to, why they use Facebook? Is Facebook easy to use compared to Twitter? Is Twitter filled with negative information in South Africa. How is Twitter used? And with qualitative research, you could even with quantitative, you can do that. But with qualitative, you could even go as far as analyzing the platform in that country, for instance, and see how people use it, the languages they use, the topics that people usually talk about in those platforms, to discover whether it can be used for entertainment, to pass time, or it can be used for information seeking, for instance, as a news platform or a platform where people discuss politics. And usually quantitative research aims to disprove theoretical assumptions. For instance, the assumptions that people have about the uses and gratifications of social media and even their consequences. And also it's used to test relationship between variables. Please refer to chapter 2 for a description of variables and various types of variables used in research and how these are tested. For instance, in one of the studies, I've described this in your literature, in the literature review section. This is how researchers can test relationships between variables. For instance, in Ferris and colleagues, in their article, they claim that there is a relationship between one contextual age. This is one of the elements of contextual age, and intrusive consequences. And again, relationship, as they said, I think they've mentioned this in their article, is not causation. They don't say that social media automatically leads to addiction. There are a number of factors that that can make an individual addicted to social media. So in their study, they claim that life satisfaction, predicts, is one of the variables that predicts intrusive consequences or social media addiction. In simple terms, this is one of the elements of addiction. So here in a quantitative study, already a theory would let you know here, using uses and gratifications theory and literature generally, it will tell you that what is related to what. And because in cross-sectional studies, where studies conducted, at one point, at a certain point in time, longitudinal studies are much more suitable for testing cause and effect. Cause and effect studies, for instance, does life satisfaction lead to social media addiction, and what other factors play a role or lead to? For instance, here they say life satisfaction, and then the motives for using social media, social media is used for leisure, then it's more likely to lead to addiction. And then you have to explain why your research design is both qualitative and quantitative. Again, here, in your instructions for your assignment 1, you're actually told that you need to use a questionnaire that has both open and closed ended questions, and that's how you collect numerical and non-numerical data in a questionnaire. So with a closed-ended question, you would get numerical data that can be quantified. For instance, it would tell us that the majority of people prefer Facebook or Instagram or YouTube. And what is the motive? You can also have that tell us the motive for using social media amongst South Africans is leisure, or is information seeking, or various, or the motive for using Twitter versus the motive for using Facebook or Instagram, for instance. So again, if you have read those articles, literature should also inform your research design. Again, another question that you have to address is the goal and objectives of your study. You have to state what is the goal, describe the goal of your study. So in research, there are mainly two goals, and which is basic or applied research. So you have to state whether the goal of your studies is basic or is your study applied research. Again, first read this in your prescribed book, and then state whether your study is basic or apply and why. So this means you have to understand the differences between basic and applied research. And then you also have to describe the objectives of your study. So in research, there are mainly three objectives: exploratory, which I've already mentioned, mainly used in qualitative studies where you explore something that is most people or most researchers do not know enough about. And then there's also descriptive objectives where you describe something. Usually that's what quantitative studies do, but qualitative studies can also do that. But quantitative studies usually describe a phenomenon in numerically, like I said, how many people use social media. Of these people, how many of them are addicted, and you would use graphs, to show or to describe that in numbers. And then another goal, or another objective is explanatory, where people explain relationships. For instance, these are cause and effect studies. Like I said, these are usually conducted over a long period of time, over years. For instance, if you want to know whether people who watch violent movies, for instance, become violent over time. For instance, you could set this with the younger people, let's say from age 10, or people who play violent video games, do these people become violent as adults? So you have to trace the lives of these people over time. Again, here you have to mention, describe it two, you have to mention two objectives of your study. Again, don't just say it's exploratory and descriptive. You need to explain what are you exploring and what are you describing. Or if you think it is explanatory, what are you explaining? Again, you need to read through this. It is in your prescribed book. Understand these objectives when they are used or when they are most appropriate, and then select, of these three, select two that you think will apply to your study. And then, give us detail. What are you exploring and what are you describing? Next is population. So with population in research can be individuals, it can be artifacts. For instance, where people analyze newspaper content, or television content, or even social media. Some researchers have analyzed, for instance, hashtags, or how people respond to certain topics on social media. But basically, population can be individuals, it can be content, advertisements, a whole lot of things. So here you have to describe your population, the population for the study. Who is your population? Is it, for instance, is it Americans, South Africans? If it is South Africans, it's university students. In your assignment instructions, you've already been told it is university students, and in this case, UNISA students more specifically. So UNISA is the area, the UNISA students will be your population here. Again, you need to describe the target population and the accessible population. Again, refer to your prescribed book for the description of these terms. So you can't just say your population is UNISA students, for instance. Then again, you have to differentiate between target population and accessible population. And basically, accessible population is a population that you have access to. So for instance, as you already know, UNISA students will be population, and then the accessible population, for instance, you have to select, for instance, would these be students at the Department of UNISA students at the Department of Communication Science? Will these be UNISA students at any department, the UNISA students that you have access to? Maybe you've got a WhatsApp group or a Facebook group or any group that you have access to of people that you know. So this here you in the accessible people, you tell us exactly. And then, for instance, this you won't have access to students who were registered last year or who have already graduated. So, for instance, you could say you have access to students who are registered this semester, which department, which age. Again, these are some of these things you'd also discuss when you discuss your sample. But what I'm trying to say is give us detail. Don't just say UNISA students. That is just too vague. For target population, yes, but as you need to break it down to these 20 people, these 20 students, where will you get them? Also, will you get them from social media, for instance, UNISA social media pages on Facebook or Twitter? And then the next thing is the unit of analysis. Also, unit of analysis can be individuals, can also be uh, artifacts like newspapers, where you analyze news articles or where you analyze advertisements in an article. So again, go through chapter 3 of your prescribed book to understand these concepts, and then explain your population, giving this detail that I've just spoken about right now. And then the next topic also related to population is the sampling method or the sampling category. Again, please go through chapter 3 of your prescribed book for sampling categories and their sampling types and the sample types that are used. Duploy identifies 3 sampling categories. This is probability sampling, quasi-probability sampling, and non-probability sampling. So from these 3 categories, each category has got its own types. So there are types of probability sample, types of quasi-probability sample, and types of non-probability sample. That's an error there. Types of non-probability sample. So for instance, if you're saying we are using a probability sampling category, then you have to tell us, are you using a simple random sampling or stratified random sampling, and why? So with the sampling category or your sampling method, you have to select the appropriate category. And really here, there is no right or wrong answer. You have to motivate your choice. Sit down and think of who you have access to. Where can you access UNISA students, and then read through these sampling categories and types and select the appropriate. So you need to understand them properly and see which one would work for you and would work for the study, considering the sample size and the fact that this is a pilot study. Next, it is data collection methods. So you have to describe your data collection methods. Again, in the instruction, you need to go back to your assignment 1 instruction. For instance, you are told that for the qualitative research design, you have to point out that you are going to use open-ended questions, and they have to be less than 10 questions to collect qualitative data. And then for the quantitative design, you have to use close-ended or structured questions or Likert scale questions, where you use close-ended and then you ask respondents or participants in your study to agree or disagree. Here they just select an option. And again, with questionnaires, these can be distributed online. These can be distributed physically with Google Forms, for instance. You can design or create a questionnaire for free. But then again, as I mentioned earlier, at this stage, you don't have to create a questionnaire, but you do have to tell us how you will distribute that questionnaire. For instance, you can distribute it online on Facebook. You can share it via WhatsApp. If you have access to students on WhatsApp, remembering that your sample size has to be 20 or less people, less than 20 people. So please be specific in terms of whether this would be an online self-administered questionnaire, or you will be printing and sending questionnaires to people and asking them to, fill by pen. But I think an online is better, and even using social media platforms like Facebook, because already these are people who use social media. And you can also mention that when you select a sample that you specifically use social media so that you get people who are users of social media or who are frequently who use social media more frequently, rather than distributing your questionnaire printing. That is just it's a lot of work, considering that we are in open distance learning institution. To be hard to meet students physically, so online would be the best platform. These are the examples of Likert scale questions, for instance, in terms of frequency. I think you've seen this even in those articles that you've read, where they describe their methodology. They've used some of these scales where they test the frequency. How often do people use a specific platform? And here, this way, people would be as to whether they agree or disagree. For instance, is social media, is Facebook entertaining, or do you use Twitter for info seeking? So the question is usually posed as a statement, not as a question, and then the person has to agree, disagree. Again, all of this information is in your prescribed book, and you will need this when you design a questionnaire. So at this point in time, you have to mention that you'll be using your questionnaire will contain both open-ended and closed-ended questionnaire, because we are using both qualitative and quantitative research design. And then research questions. Remember, you have to formulate research questions. If you downloaded the assignment one and the assessment one shell folder on the module site, you will see that instead of the research problem or main issue, here you have to formulate at least 3 research questions. So research questions are basically informed by literature and even theory, because after you've read those 3 articles, for instance, having learned about how people use social media and the consequences, such as addiction, consequences of social media use, and factors that lead to, for instance, social media addiction, such as contextual age, life satisfaction, and individuals' social activity. So your research questions should be informed by literature, and should also be linked to the research topic. For instance, your population is UNISA students, so your research questions should reflect that. For instance, if you were analyzing which traditional media are used by UNISA students, then you could ask questions about which newspapers are used by UNISA students generally, or at a specific department. But your question can be general as long as it reflects the population. And then it should also reflect that the type of data you would need to to answer these questions. For instance, if you were conducting content analysis, for instance, if you were analyzing newspapers, you would ask questions about media bias, how newspapers represent the ANC versus EFF or DA, you know, how they represent or write about political parties. Is the bias, is media neutral? So your questions should always reflect the data that you would need to collect to answer that question. Again, here, this is your topic. So your questions should revolve around uses and gratifications, effects of social media networks among UNISA students. Again, please check your prescribed book has information on how to formulate research questions and to break down a study. You know, for instance, you want to find out what motivate people to use social media, what are the motives, and then what are the consequences, which social media is frequently used, and those type of. So please go back to your prescribed book and formulate proper research questions. And remember, you have to answer these research questions in your exam portfolio after collecting data. So please avoid vague questions that you won't even be able to answer. Your data the data that you collect has to answer these questions. So again, go to your prescribed book for more information on how to formulate research questions, and also look at the instruction that is given in your assignments as to the types of, this should also inform the kind of questions that you can ask. And that is all for the research methodology framework. Please, if you have any questions, feel free to contact us. You can send us an email. You can also call us. Our details are on the site, on the module site. So please make sure that you submit your assignment on time and make sure that you study. You really need to study for you to do well on this assignment. So you're not to answer this question, you basically have to study. You're not thumb-sucking, figuring out how to collect data. You just have to make sure that you follow the instructions that are in your assignment one, a document or the tutorial letter, and then read the articles that you were asked to read, and then your prescribed book as well. And then you'd have answers. And we're really looking forward to your assignments, and we wish you all the best. So please put, as much effort as possible in your assignment. Again, the deadline is the 22nd. Please note there will be no extension. Please try to submit on the 21st. Load shedding excuses really don't work. Again, please make sure you submit your assignment on time. And before then, you can contact us if you have any questions on Monday. I think the 21st is a holiday. So yeah, please work hard on your assignment this weekend. Wrap up whatever is missing in your assignment. On Monday, you can ask us questions, but yeah, if you didn't do your assignment on time, please don't ask panicky questions. Make sure you study your prescribed book and the articles, and I really wish you all the best. I wish you do well in this assignment and in your exam portfolio as well. After this, we will discuss. We'll have more classes. I actually thought I would have a Q&A today, but because Moodle were technical issues, we couldn't access Moodle properly, this week. But before exams, we'll have a class where we can have a question and answer session. But please, if you have any questions, feel free to contact us via our emails, and you can call us. Other than that, please also follow the technical presentation guidelines. Go through that tutorial later. CMN out 301, and also the extra documents that we provided on academic writing. Make sure your writing is is clear. Always aim for simple and clear writing when you're writing. If there's a concept that you don't understand, get a definition, use Google. Remember, here English is our second or even third language for most of us. So always aim for simplicity in your writing. Don't use words that you don't know. And please do cite the sources that you use. Don't plagiarize. That tutorial testament, I will tell you how to, for instance, if you are quoting, you know how to go about that. If you are paraphrasing, how to do that. So please make sure you follow those guidelines, your table of contents, your declaration at third level. These you should know by now, but make sure that you download your declaration and make sure that your table of contents is proper, your list of sources consulted. And also for this assignment, you don't have to submit the self-assessment. That is only required in assignment 3. All right. Please feel free to contact me if you have any further questions, and all the best with your assignment. Thank you.